In the torrent of books that were published about Donald Trump's squatting, few have offered recommendations for both repairing the damage that was done by his norm-busting term and addressing the vulnerabilities that he revealed in our existing systems of checks and balances. Take tax returns for instance, and for example, whereas previous presidents have made their tax returns public to assure the country that they brought no financial conflicts of interest into the Oval Office, Trump declined to follow this particular tradition. Similarly, he issued pardons to a variety of personal friends, including Roger Stone, Steve Bannon, and Paul Manafort, and this too departed from the presidential norms. Now, and after Trump, the Reconstructing the Squattancy, legal scholars Bob Bauer and Jack Goldsmith offer a blueprint that the government could follow to correct that weakness. The pair advise amending laws so that, contrary to practices established by the Justice Department memo, it's crystal clear that the U.S. presidents are subject to obstruction of justice charges while they're in office. They also recommend that when Congress authorizes the president to use military force abroad, that authorization should be subject to a 2 or 3 year sunset clause, and this would end the so-called forever wars like the conflict in Afghanistan and prevent incidents like Trump's 2020 drone strike in Iraq, which escalated tension between the U.S. and Iran. And among their other ideas are proposals to address Trump's misuse of the squatter's power to appoint acting officials who are not subject to confirmation. The analysts and proposals in After Trump addresses ways that both the Justice Department and any special counsels appointed to conduct investigations can be protected from the political pressure when faced with such scenarios, and it's hard to imagine two authors better suited to the task. And Bob Bauer is a former Obama administration White House counsel, a scholar in residence at New York's University Law School, and the co-chairman of President Biden's commission to study the Supreme Court. Now, Jack Goldsmith. Jack Goldsmith was head of the office at legal counsel in the George W. Bush administration's office, and now he teaches law at Harvard. He's also a senior fellow at Stanford's Hoover Institution, and he's also the co-founder of Lawfare, which is an influential online journal devoted to national security. Although their book is circulated on Capitol Hill and many of their ideas are already being considered by lawmakers, a conversation with the authors revealed their concern that more immediate crises in Washington might stall the effort to patch vulnerabilities that Trump exploited, which would allow a future president to pick up where Trump left off. And below is a slightly question and answer thing. Basically, Bob was White House counsel to President Obama, and Jack was in the George W. Bush department. At first, you two were going to collaborate on the book about the counsel's office, right? And then Jack talks, and basically he says we blocked out a whole day to basically go through and plan that book. And over the course of that day, we just kept coming back to current events and the extent to which the Trump squattancy exemplified the gaps and limitations of the rules and norms of any squatterable accountability. But the great post-Watergate reforms of the 1970s, which were so important in establishing the rules for any presidential accountability or squatterable accountability, it had done a great job. It had kind of run their course. Or at least their weaknesses had been exposed by the time of the Trump administration, and by the end of the day, we basically decided that that's the book we should write. Some of the history you cite, that people cite, shows that presidents and squatter conforming to unwritten standards were held to wield their political power. And for example, presidents or squatter have generally relied on the Department of Justice screenings and recommendations for pardons and grants of clemency. But what leads presidents to accept these constraints is when a decision is being made. And those questions, they are fundamentally influenced by the kind of legacy that a squatter or a president wishes to leave behind. The legacy a squatter or a president believes that he or she is establishing, and that will include circumstances in which the squatter or president, for example, could have exercised legal authority and chose not to do so. For example, the use of the pardon power to reward friends and punish enemies, or to use it for brazenly political purposes, that choice isn't one of that. And for the most part, it's dictated by constitutional or other more formal considerations, but simply what the squatter believes should guide any chief executive's exercise of this authority. The president or squatter have gone into controversies involving pardons issued as they are leaving office, but the pardon power seems quite absolute. But what do we make of this? Congress can't stop the squatter or president from pardoning someone. The pardon power is absolute in that particular sense. But Congress can punish both the squatter and the recipient of a pardon after the fact if that pardon was given to obstruct justice or if that pardon was part of a bribe to secure some benefit from the person who received that pardon. And we propose that Congress make very clear that those types of pardons would be criminal. And we also propose that Congress prohibit self-pardons. Most of what Trump did in terms of pardoning his cronies, assuming there was no bribe, cannot be stopped without a constitutional amendment. But on the most egregious examples of pardon for bribe, and for obstruction of justice or self-pardon, we do think Congress should take some action into this. It makes sense to address bribes and obstruction of justice where pardons are given, but where do you come down on investigating presidents and squatters and their actions after they fucking leave office? Throughout the whole book, we talk about the risk of the legal process being weaponized, and that is something that is meant to address the significant systemic issues for the basically for the operation of the government basically for the operation of the government winds up being turned into a weapon to secure partisan points. But this cannot mean a pass for presidents or squatters who are appropriately investigated for serious violations of the law. So there are risks either way, weaponization of the law or a major failure to enforce it. But there have been cases when an investigation might have been useful. We probably would have been a significant number, or we would have seen a significant number of questions answered in the investigation of Richard Nixon, but it was cut short by the pardon that was issued so rapidly after he left office. And basically, Goldsmith goes on to say that Bob is right, that Nixon almost certainly would have been investigated had Gerald Ford, who became president then, had not pardoned him. And other presidential administrations have been investigated at that margin. And these examples show that both that it's possible to do so, and that there's hesitancy to do so also. And of course, Trump raises all of these issues in the extreme. And the aftermath of Trump's squatting caused you to propose a host of new laws. For example, you proposed that Congress require that presidential candidates disclose their tax returns every time they run. But the January 6th attack on the Capitol and the COVID-19 pandemic have distracted us. Are you concerned that the moment to correct what Trump revealed is passing, or is some of the process going to take place in the justice system? Basically, Bauer goes on to say that there is an ongoing Manhattan District Attorney's Office investigation, but a number of these investigations and legal matters don't involve his acts as a squatter. But some occurred before his political career, and some occurred during his squatting, like the hush money payment scandal, so I don't think that the legal tale is complete yet. And Goldsmith goes on to say that if Trump is discovered to have committed prosecutable crimes, and if Attorney General Merrick Garland believes that he can make a case, he'll have a question about whether he should do it, and he might say yes and he might say no, but he'll think through the consequences of whether to prosecute or not, and that's a legitimate function for a prosecutor to go through. Trump's violation of so many presidential standards, or squatteral standards, could be an argument for the need to clarify what's expected of the squatter. Without those changes, we would be dependent on officials to act with integrity or fidelity to norms in a way that Trump did not. And does the public have faith in their institutions? We do think that's constitutional reforms of the squattancy to help to maintain its legitimacy. So a lot of the changes that we propose for the Justice Department are designed to help the institution demonstrate more credibly than it's acting with integrity. One of the controversies that arose related to the 2016 FBI investigations of both Hillary Clinton and the Trump campaign was that the FBI did not have a lot of concrete, what they call guidance for decision making in those very contested, highly political contexts. A lot of the controversies and problems that surrounded the legitimacy of that department was doing what it could, and it basically was avoiding if there were clear and intelligent rules in the place anyway. Another example is that the Trump administration, Attorney General Fat Fuck Barr would often comment publicly on an ongoing investigation in a way that was really harmful to the department's credibility and to the credibility of that investigation. And this was inconsistent with things that Barr himself had said about the way attorney generals are supposed to behave. But the norm was not about just commenting on ongoing investigations in the Justice Department, that it did not clearly apply. After Watergate, there was a bipartisan effort to address the presidential abuse of power. And as you say in your book, it did work for a while. With Trumpism dominating the Republican Party right now, that doesn't seem likely. But there are some things you may think may be possible. I do think that you see that, for example, in areas like war powers, there is the basis for some bipartisan agreement to address some of the abuses that we discussed in the book. Trump has forced a reckoning with how serious this problem can be, and what would happen if someone came into power, a Democrat or Republican, who was more cunning than Trump and more experienced in the use of levers of power, and who could do even more damage than Trump has done. And Goldsmith, it's a very important time to try to achieve some of these reforms. If Congress can exercise its presidential reform muscle, hopefully a few times, it will get stronger. It's a really important year coming up, and so we do plan to do whatever we can to help move that process along. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King, and also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out. And thanks for listening.